Welcome to another FPL video. I'm going to be showing you the best wildcard team you can make ahead of Game Week 8, and the kind of key thing in my opinion is to have a good squad, medium to long term, rather than just a few weeks where you benefit from the wildcard and then later on you're in a bit of a predicament. So without further ado, let's head straight into the video. So in this video, what I'm going to do is actually show you the best team here, which you see on screen, explain the picks, and then show you some alternative teams, structures, and also players that you can go for. So right here, what you see is very similar to my wildcard team, and that's obviously why, at this moment in time, that is my wildcard team, because if I don't think it's the best, or at least one of the best teams you can make, then why am I making it? That's pretty much the way I see it. But in terms of the goalkeepers, I think you can be a bit flexible here. I've been talking about this in the past few videos. Ramsdale, Raya, and potentially McCarthy, but I think the first two names in particular, I think are the best options at the moment. Sanchez is good for the next 3 or 4 game weeks, but then some really tough fixtures for Brighton. But I still think long term, Brighton have some good fixtures sprinkled in between. So not necessarily the worst case in the world if you still have Robert Sanchez. I just think his lack of save points and bonus points, I think, reduces his appeal significantly. But Ramsdale and Raya, they can both get clean sheets, just like Brighton and Sanchez, but they can also get the save and bonus points, which I think is very important. I wouldn't overcomplicate with your 4 million goalkeeper. I'd just go for Ben Foster, who, yeah, fair enough. I don't expect him to kind of continue to start. It should be Backman, but still, he has the highest chance and probability of starting of any 4 million goalkeeper, so there's no real need to overcomplicate that. Now, with the defence, there are kind of a few differences, or at least in the whole team, there's a few differences to my wildcard squad. So what I've really done here is get Lukaku out for Jamie Vardy, and that has given me enough money to do Diaz or Azpilicueta to Trent Alexander-Arnold. So this is one way you can go about it, and you don't have to have Trent, by the way, in every single wildcard team. I think, obviously, he's a really good player. His ownership is really appealing, by the way, around 22%, and of course, that's a big plus, but you don't have to have him. And if we're kind of looking at the fixtures, there is an argument to maybe get Trent Alexander-Arnold around Game Week 13. So, in my opinion, you don't have to have him, but the kind of best balance, in my opinion, is having one Chelsea defender, one City, and Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think that's just the best way to go about it. And Cancelo, once again, because he's nailed at the moment and has that attacking potential, I'd go for him over Diaz at this moment in time. And then with Rudiger, Azpilicueta, they're both really good options. They're both the most nailed Chelsea defenders. Azpilicueta will get you more bonus points potentially and also attacking returns, but Rudiger is a bit cheaper, and both of them are really good choices anyway. And Rudiger can still score 3 to 5 goals this season, and he's just a really big presence from set pieces and corners. Azpilicueta tends to get the assists more often than not. But I think if you want to go for kind of these big defenders and big names, go for a City defender, go for a Chelsea one, in my opinion. And if you can, if you have the budget, go for Trent Alexander-Arnold. Livramento and Duffy are, in my opinion, the best cheap defenders you can go for, alongside Ben White, who's 4.4 million. And yeah, I think those three, you're kind of sorted. It doesn't matter who you go for. And if you don't have Robert Sanchez, I think Duffy or Veltman are really good cover for Brighton defence. And then with Livramento, I would rather have him over McCarthy, if I'm being completely honest. And he is cheaper, he can get bonus points and even attacking returns, not on a consistent basis, but still, for that price, I just think he's exceptional value, and he's worth that little bit extra over someone like Williams or Manquillo. So I'd go for Livramento, in my opinion. And then looking at the midfield, I've been discussing this recently. It's very similar pretty much to the midfield I had in my wildcard team. So Salah is a no-brainer. Don't overcomplicate it. Yes, Liverpool have a few tough fixtures like Manchester United in Game Week 9, but do not overcomplicate it. Don't go without Salah, in my opinion. He is at the moment the best FPL asset in the game. And then Rafinha around this price, really good choice. But once again, like I said in the rating your teams video, be careful with him, because he's actually made such a big difference in Brazil's game against Venezuela that he could play the second and third match in the qualifiers, which means he's going to miss the Southampton game. And obviously, if he does play against Uruguay, that's pretty much a day or two before their match against Southampton. So keep that in mind before kind of, completely committing to Rafinha. But long term, I think he's one of the best choices you can go for. And then Heung-min Son, I still think he's one of the best midfielders in the game. And if you can afford him, go for it. The next 4 fixtures as a whole aren't too impressive. Obviously, after the Newcastle game in Game Week 8, Spurs have some really tough fixtures like West Ham, Everton and Manchester United, but I still think that Son can score in those fixtures, and he's just fixture proof, got great fixtures anyway for a long period of time, so I still think he's one of the best choices you can go for on a wildcard right now. And of course, if you don't want to go for him, you can go for Lukaku up front instead and then downgrade Son to a cheaper midfielder. Then we have Curtis Jones, and this is kind of an interesting pick, and this is going a bit different. I'm going to be showing you some alternatives to him if you don't really trust him too much, which I completely understand. But I think he got 3 or 4 assists against Porto in the Champions League, which is insane. And then in the Premier League, he's actually got 7 and 8 points in the last 2 appearances. And obviously that includes Manchester City, who are probably the best defensive side in Europe. So Curtis Jones is someone to look out for. People always ask me who is kind of the best option around 5 million. And a lot of people point towards Kovacic, who's been doing really well so far. But in my opinion, I'd rather have Curtis Jones, and I think he's actually, arguably maybe the kind of third Liverpool player we should go for rather than Jota, who is an injury concern at the moment. And then the kind of last midfielder is Douglas Luiz, and I'll be talking about other midfielders you can go for around that price, but he's one of the kind of standouts there, and I wouldn't overthink it once again. Same with kind of Foster. The main kind of decisions you have to make is with your starting 11 players and just those who actually will play, like Livramento and Duffy, that you'd actually be willing to start in your team. And then the attackers, very similar once again to my best wildcard team. Antonio's in there, but once again, you don't have to go for him because the fixtures are very poor for West Ham, and there is a feasible argument to go without him. Maybe go for Jimenez or Hwang or all these other players around that price. And then Ivan Toney. I think his fixtures long-term up until Game Week 19 are exceptional, especially from Game Weeks 10 to 12. There are still some kind of tough fixtures sprinkled in between, but Ivan Toney is probably the best around his price, and I'll be discussing a few alternatives later on. And then Jamie Vardy, he's the main difference in this team, in for Lukaku, and that has given me the money to do Azpilicueta to Trent Alexander-Arnold. And if Lukaku is out, which I don't really think is going to be the case, but Jamie Vardy, I think, is a really good pick. Despite the really tough fixtures coming up, like Manchester United, I still think Vardy is one of the best strikers you can go for, and I definitely seriously consider him. If you're asking me who would I go for right now between Son and Vardy, around that same price, I'd go for Son because I still would back Son to score more over the next 4 games than Vardy, but both are really good choices, and so far this season Vardy has been one of the best players, so yeah, you can't really look past him too much. And of course, if Lukaku is out, don't overthink it and just go for Jamie Vardy at this moment in time, despite the really tough fixtures. Some of you may disagree with some of these picks, and I completely understand that. Like Curtis Jones, for example, I really like him as a pick. He's looking really promising at the moment, but would I go for him myself in my team? Maybe not, and I'll admit that. So that's why I've made a few kind of drafts and shown you different avenues and players you can go for. So here we go with the second team. There's no Trent Alexander-Arnold, that's the key difference. And we've also got Raya in goal instead of Ramsdale. And once again, I think Raya and Ramsdale are the 2 best keepers you can go for. So make your pick there and then kind of stick to it. You don't want to be in a situation where you go for one of them and then you want to transfer them, a few weeks down the line. And it could happen with Ramsdale if he loses a spot, but in my opinion, he won't. It's all down to him. And if he makes a mistake, then Leno has a chance of getting back in. But it's pretty much Leno's or Ramsdale's spot to lose. And then once again, Foster, 4 million keeper. Do not overthink it. And I think if you want to go big at the back, double Chelsea and double City defence is an exceptional, choice to make. And I think they are the 2 best defences at the moment. And of course, the big kind of missing ingredient here is probably Trent Alexander-Arnold. And if you want, you could downgrade someone in the midfield or attack to then get Trent in. And once again, you could do Lukaku to Vardy or someone even cheaper and then get Trent Alexander-Arnold in. But I would once again go for Cancelo over Diaz at this moment in time, but that is not to say that Diaz is a bad pick. The same goes for Azpilicueta and Rudiger. There's not much to separate them. Right now, I'd maybe go for Azpilicueta, but still, both of them really good choices. And long term, maybe Rudiger's the kind of better pick because he's slightly cheaper. And then if you need that cheap 5th defender, then maybe you could just go for Livramento. And if not, you could still go for one of the 4 million options, but I just would want to go with Livramento with the fixtures that Southampton have. And then you can always go for Duffy or Ben White once again. And then with the midfield, I wouldn't overcomplicate it too much, but once again, looking at the kind of 4.5, 4.6 million options, Allen is one of the best, and he's actually doing the best so far around his price bracket, so you could just go for him. I'm not expecting him to get assists and win penalties every single game week, but he is a good choice nonetheless, and him and Douglas Luiz are probably the standouts at this moment in time. Rafinha and Salah, as you can kind of probably tell, are two kind of fixed players in my wildcard team, despite the concerns we may have over Rafinha not starting in Game Week 8, despite what Leeds United have come out and said before the games even started for the qualifiers. So let's just keep an eye on that situation, but I'd still go for both of them. And here, as you can see, is Phil Foden in the midfield instead of Heung-min Son. And Foden is a really good pick. And if you look at his points over the season and even last season, they're very impressive when he actually starts. The problem with Foden, just like with a lot of Manchester City players, is when will he start? And they could be a really good fixture. For example, we cast our minds back to Ferran Torres against Southampton a few game weeks ago. A lot of people were really excited about Ferran Torres potentially starting and doing really well against the Saints, and he didn't even start. I don't even think he was in the squad, if I remember correctly. So something like that could happen to Foden, especially with the Champions League coming back and Manchester City having so many players available, and they just have so many options to choose from. So that's something to bear in mind. But Foden is still, in my opinion, the best City midfielder you can go for on a wild card. Just bear in mind they could be rotated from time to time. If you want a 1 week punt against Burnley, then I'd probably go for Riyad Mahrez. His record against Burnley is exceptional, and 30% of his goals for Manchester City have come against the Clarets, which is absolutely insane. But long term, you probably wouldn't want to have Mahrez, who is just a complete headache in terms of starts and minutes. And then we have Mbeumo. You could maybe double up with Mbeumo and Tony. I'd personally just go for one of them, not double up. But from game weeks 10 to 12, I think the double up could be very, very profitable. But maybe in the long term, I'd just rather stick to one of them. So make your pick there and then kind of just stick to it. But here we have Armstrong up front in this kind of team. You could just go for Ivan Toney. And with all of these squads, by the way, we have a bit of money left in the bank. I'll show you towards the end how much we have. But Adam Armstrong is probably still one of the best choices you can go for up front. The reason why I haven't really considered him for my team is because so far this season, we just haven't seen enough bonus points or even potential for bonus points from Armstrong. Of course, the fixtures have been very tough for Southampton. Maybe now when their fixtures ease up a little bit, that's where we can see the best from Adam Armstrong. And when James Ward-Prowse isn't on the pitch, Armstrong should be the next in command. He did take penalties for Blackburn Rovers, so that's something to think about as well. And I still would prefer Ivan Toney, possibly Hwang and Jimenez, but Armstrong is a good choice. And then speaking of the Mexican, we do have Raul Jimenez here, and I think up until Game Week 14 he's good. Maybe looking beyond that, he's not necessarily the best pick, and I'd rather have Mikel Antonio, in my opinion, despite the tough fixtures, because Antonio has shown so much this season. But of course, over the last 2 game weeks, not many players have been better than Raul Jimenez, who has been exceptional, both in terms of goal scoring and also assist threat. And his combination with Hwang looked really promising against Newcastle, so something to bear in mind. And then we have Romelu Lukaku. Let's see if he is fit. If he is, I'd go for him over Vardy at this moment in time for the next 4 game weeks. But looking long term, I'd probably rather have Jamie Vardy because one, he's been doing better so far this season, and also sometimes you look at Chelsea and they can score goals from a lot of different avenues. The same can't be said for Leicester, who have a lot of good attacking players, including strikers, but Vardy is still the main talisman. And of course, Lukaku is for Chelsea as well, but Vardy is more talismanic, I think, for Leicester than Lukaku is currently for Chelsea. But over the next 4, you look at the fixtures for Lukaku and Chelsea, I'd definitely go for him over Vardy. But then after that, you can make an easy switch to the Englishman, or if not, you can go to Ronaldo around Game Week 15. So I think there are no issues there, and they're all good choices. And once again, if Lukaku is fit, I'll be probably going for him over Jamie Vardy right now. Now this final team, once again, very similar to the others, but I'm showing you some alternatives in key positions. And the main thing I'll be discussing and highlighting it later is kind of certain players and teams you want to target in each position. So once again with the goalkeepers, if you're not really fancying Raya or Ramsdale, you could go for McCarthy or maybe Jose Sarr. But McCarthy isn't a bad choice. I'd rather have Livramento over McCarthy as your Southampton defensive cover, if I'm being completely honest, but still, he's a good option, and Southampton have some good fixtures. McCarthy can get some save points and bonus, and if you saw his save against Werner, by the way, in the 3-1 win for Chelsea, it was absolutely incredible. One of the best saves over the weekend. And then looking at the defence, We've got Duffy in there again as a budget defender because we do have McCarthy already. I wouldn't double up with McCarthy and Livramento personally, even though it could be really good for the next 4 game weeks, because long term you probably wouldn't want a Southampton defensive double up. And then we've got Rudiger in there once again with the double Manchester City defence. It's up to you who you double up on in terms of the defence, Chelsea or City. I think long term City is the one to go for, but up until game week 14, I think Chelsea could be the ones to go for. So from that period up until game week 14, it's Chelsea. Beyond that, for me, Manchester City are probably the clear winners, so long as Cancelo can maintain that starting berth. And then we've got Ben White as that final budget option. And once again, if you don't go for Livramento or Duffy, I'd definitely recommend Ben White as a cheap defender. And him and Duffy can rotate very well. And you've already got those kind of free, reliable defenders from 2 top clubs. And then looking at the midfield, we've got Andros Townsend. You could go for Gray, for example, or Decore, but Townsend at the moment is looking like the best one. I've got my concerns about him, and I talked about this in my team selection. With Richarlison and Calvert-Lewin coming back, will Townsend still be getting these double-digit returns and being so reliable and consistent as an FPL asset? I'm not too sure, and he might still tick along nicely with assists and goals, but I don't think he'll be as explosive. Once again, we've got Phil Foden. You could go for Grealish or Ferran Torres, or maybe Mahrez as a 1-week punt. And of course, a lot of people have been mentioning Kevin De Bruyne, but still for me, the City midfielder of choice at the moment is Phil Foden. Now he's fully back and he's fit. And to be honest, he's the kind of player who could start every single game for Manchester City. And once again, in the UCL Fantasy last season, he was the top scoring midfielder in the game. The problem with him, once again, is the starts, which I'd say kind of diminishes his reliability and also kind of reputation for a lot of FPL managers. Salah, once again, don't overthink it. I think he's pretty much going to be in every single one of my drafts. And I just don't want to think about going without him, especially with the form he's currently in. Rafinha, once again, just bear in mind the situation with Brazil, but he's still a really good choice. And then we've got Brownhill. If you just want someone cheap and you're not really too concerned about your 4.5 or 4.6 million midfielder, just go for Brownhill, who's 4.4, and he'll do the job nicely, get you 2 points most weeks. And then we've got the front 3. So instead of Jimenez, we've got Hwang. And I think it's worth having a punt with him, especially because Wolves have good fixtures up until game week 14, and you may not want to have that Wolves striker for a longer period of time. So Hwang could be the one to go for over Raul Jimenez, and he could be exceptional. I would expect him to start in game week 8 after his heroics in game week 7, so I would definitely give him a chance, and if you have a good feeling about him, go for it. And he's not someone I would probably rely on long term, but up until game week 14 could be a very nice punt indeed. And then of course you can always switch to Mbeumo in the midfield or Ivan Toney when Brentford's fixtures come along around game week 10 to 12. And then once again we've got Jamie Vardy up front with Lukaku, and once again that's hugely dependent on whether Lukaku is fit enough or not, which I believe he will be, and let's wait and see what Thomas Tuchel says in the press conference. Same with all the other managers of all these other clubs. And Jamie Vardy, I think a double up of Lukaku and Vardy could be really good, especially having Salah in the midfield and having a solid defence like that. So it's up to you what you end up going for, but I think the key thing in kind of all these wildcard teams I've showed you is going for Foster as your 4 million goalkeeper, going for a kind of 4.5, 4.6 million goalkeeper like McCarthy, but I'd rather go for Raya or Ramsdale, so take your pick there. And then in the defence, I'd go for 1, if not 2 budget defenders, and if you do so, I'd go for Duffy, Ben White and Livramento. And if you want to go big at the back, go for either Trent Alexander-Arnold or go for double City defence. Maybe you want to go for double Chelsea, but really the main thing is getting Chelsea coverage in defence, City, and possibly Trent Alexander-Arnold if you can do so. And then if you can get all 3 and then also get a Ben White and a Duffy, that would be pretty much fine. Same with Livramento. And then with the midfield, I'd go for Salah and Rafinha for sure. Get that 4.5 or 4.6 million option. Otherwise, you can just go for Brownhill to save money. And then I'd go for either Foden or Son. It depends who you want to go for up front and in the midfield. And then I'd go for a 5.5 million option like Townsend, Gray or Mbeumo. Take your pick there. There's also Gallagher and also Curtis Jones. They're all good choices. So just pick any one of them and you'll be fine, in my opinion. And of course, Arsenal midfielders like Saka, Smith Rowe and Odegaard could be decent, but I'd rather go for the other midfielders I discussed there. And then up front, I'd go for either Vardy or Lukaku. That's what I personally do, although, you know, they're all good choices. And I'd also go for kind of a cheap striker like Toney or Hwang. You could possibly go for Armstrong, but I would prefer, in my opinion, Toney or Hwang. And if you don't go for Hwang, you could go for Jimenez or Antonio as your kind of third striker. And another thing to consider is that Calvert-Lewin is coming back from injury, so he's someone else to consider. But I'm the kind of manager who wants to wait and see how a player returns from injury and how they do, see a bit of form and at least underlying stats and promising signs before committing to them again. So Calvert-Lewin, keep an eye on him, but I probably wouldn't go for him just yet. And you can always cover Everton with Gray, Doucouré or Townsend. And another striker to consider is Bamford, but if you already have Rafinha, I don't really see a huge need to go for him. So with the first team I showed before wrapping up, I actually have 0.6 million in the bank. So of course you can make changes accordingly, and let me know what you would change with all of these teams, by the way. And then with the second team, we actually have 1.1 million, so a lot of money in the bank. So once again, you can make any changes you want. It's all down to personal preference. I'm just offering my opinions and a very important team structure which can be very beneficial in the long term and make full use of this wild card. And then with this final team, we have 0.3 million. So with all of them, you've got a bit of money left over. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's good to have flexibility and be able to make changes further down the line. And of course, you know, looking at Game Week 15, for example, when Manchester United have good fixtures, having that 1 million in the bank could be very beneficial because you could easily do a move like Lukaku to Ronaldo without having to make downgrades or taking hits elsewhere when the time comes. So thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new around here. Really appreciate all the support. Hopefully you enjoyed and liked these wildcard teams, and what changes would you make? Like I said before, let me know down in the comment section below. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm active on those platforms, and you can always send in your teams and wildcards. I've already kind of got a full window for both of them, for the wildcards and non-wildcard teams, but maybe ahead of Game Week 9 you can send in your teams for that, and also for future Game Weeks I'll let you guys know which ones will be eligible for those types of videos. Thank you so much for the support. Really appreciate all the new channel members, all the super chats, so really humbled by the support, and I'll see you next time.